So I'm Angela Onwuachi-Willig. I'm Dean and the Ryan Roth Gallo and Ernest J. Gallo Professor of Law at Boston University School of Law. Critical race theory is an approach to studying law that looks at the relationship between law, race, and racism. And in particular, it looks at the way in which law has facilitated racism, the way in which racism is embedded into the law itself, whether it's case law or whether it's statutes. And it really works to undo and to propose solutions for eradicating racism in our society. Part of understanding the relationship between race, racism, and the law is understanding what race is. And race is a social construction. It's not purely biological, right? That it is something that is constructed through history, through politics, through through a variety of factors, right? There's no gene that is shared by all people who identify as one race. In fact, you might see more commonalities among people who identify with different racial backgrounds. One of the ways in which we know that race is not biological is that they aren't the same racial categories in all kinds of countries. The racial categories differ in Brazil, differ in the United States, they differ in South Africa, right? But yet the fact that race is a social construction doesn't mean that the consequences of race aren't real, is what critical race theory says. In the same way that the fact that money, right? For example, I can't have a dollar bill, right? A dollar bill is a social construction. It doesn't have any inherent meaning. It's something meaning that we have given it in the same way that different racial categories have meaning. And yet I can't write on a piece of white paper $1 and then try to go to a store and spend it, right? There are real consequences to it in the fact that whether there are real consequences to the social meanings that are attached to race. That's what critical race theory says to us. Critical race theory also says to us that color blindness won't eliminate racism, that you can't ignore race in trying to eliminate racism, that you can't say, we're just going to treat everybody the same after exactly in the same way, that equity has to be taken into account, that substantive equality is more important than formal equality, is what critical race theory also says. And what critical race theory is not, is critical race theory is not something that says that all white people are bad. In fact, critical race theory does the opposite. It doesn't focus on bad actors. Critical race theory makes it clear that racism is not simply about bad actors, that in fact, the most damaging, the most harmful racism is structural racism. Racism that's built into our structures like the law, that's built into various policies and practices that reproduce and that reinforce and that perpetuate racism and its harmful effects. Critical race theory is also not taught generally in K through 12 schools. Not that it would be a problem if it were, but it's not generally taught in K through 12 schools. It is generally taught at the college level, it's generally taught at the law school level. The things that people are focused on is teaching our students about real history, teaching them about the realities of slavery, teaching them about the realities of the Jim Crow, teaching them about the realities of redlining and all the things that have produced the kinds of racial inequities that we see in our society. And we have to understand that people must be educated about those things if we want to get rid of racism in our society, if we want to have a truly equal society, if we want to live up to the promise of the United States and of what the founders wrote in our founding documents. We have to, which was later amended, obviously, in our founding documents, that we have to understand our true history. And children are old enough to understand that in the same way, of all races, old enough to understand it in the same way that children of color have to learn these things at a very young age simply because of their racial background and the various experiences they have with racism are forced to learn these things at a quite early age. Critical race theory is an important way of thinking about how we make our society a better place. It is not an enemy to the United States. It's not an enemy to the world. And I hope that people have an open mind to learning more about critical race theory.